Live.
Good evening, Sacramento Kings fans and listeners of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. My name is Matt George from Sports 1140 KHDK, joined by my friend and partner from Cowbell Kingdom, Mr. Leo Biez.
How you doing, Matthew?
Everything is going well. I cannot complain so far. It's been certainly a good 24 hours if you lump together
the Kings won the championship.
Well, I mean, as close as we're probably going to get beating the Cleveland Cavaliers. But it was actually cool today on our show, The Drive, this morning on KHDK. We debuted a little thing called the the NBA Championship Belt, and how it works is the champion owns the belt until they lose, and then the team they lose to becomes champion. So if the Cavs had not lost a game yet all season and the Kings had beaten last night, then the Kings would have the championship belt, like WWE or UFC style. So currently, I think Nate Goodyear was the one that went through it all, and I think he said, I can't remember who he said has the belt right now. But funny enough, the team that has owned the belt the most this season, the team has beat the most champions this year, believe it or not, the Dallas Mavericks.
Wow.
So that was one of the fun little segments that we got to do today. But yes, the Kings can feel like champions, at least for a night, after knocking off the Cavaliers and doing it on a night that LeBron James got a triple-double, and they did it in overtime, and they did it in Cleveland. So certainly a good night, to say the least. Say what you want about the Cavaliers and how they may be struggling, how LeBron James is a sissy, whiny baby who continues to talk dirt about people.
And they missed 17 free throws, so if they make 4 of those, they probably win the game.
I mean, the Cavs have their own problem, but they're still the defending champions, so the Kings to go out and get that win is very, very surprising. Got a lot of good effort and a lot of good numbers out of Malachi Richardson, which we'll talk about a little bit. Also a good performance out of one Willie Cauley-Stein, which was very welcome sight to see him playing and using and making the most out of his minutes. I think Dave Yeager's starting to come around a little bit and find a way to incorporate his youth into the game and also be able to continue to strive and push for that potential playoff spot if that is still on the Kings' radar. Of course, his hand has been forced a little bit with the loss of Rudy Gay, and we'll talk about that as well. And then we'll talk really, really briefly on the ESPN article about DeMarcus Cousins, because as great of an article as it is and as long as it is, there's really not much to talk about it because most of it is what we already know. Yep. But let's start with the Cleveland game, Leo. It was a complete effort. DeMarcus, I think he said that it was probably their best 48-minute complete game performance of the year. And I would agree with that for the most part. I think they did have some lulls, and there were some times, especially when the Kings went down by 10 in the fourth quarter, you're thinking, oh, crap, here we go again. But they did a nice job battling back, and they did so with a team effort. It wasn't DeMarcus Cousins scoring 35, 40 points. It was he had an off night, but his team picked him up. You got the big game winner from Aaron Aflalo. You got good shots from Garrett Temple, Malachi Richardson, Darren Collison with a nice transition layup. Everybody did their part, and when that team plays together like that, a solid effort together, this is a team that I can believe in, not to take it all the way, but certainly to make a lot more noise than they currently are.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with Big Cuz because, well, the team did play their best game of the season, and it sucks that it came midway through the season because if they played like this earlier, we'd be talking playoffs right now and possibly, 8, 7, 6 seed. But since they don't play this way every single game, we have to talk about how they can potentially fall out as far as the playoff race and not gain a draft pick in a super loaded draft. But anytime you beat the defending NBA champions on the road, that is always a good thing, Matt. Last night, Emmanuel and I were at El Rey shooting some stuff with Kenny Thomas, and we watched the game there. We're just talking, watching the game together and just talking about what they can do better. And, Kenny had lots of good things to say. I think one of them was, they have no Rudy Gay. And I asked him, what does DeMarcus have to do to motivate, to inspire his teammates? He said, you know what? He should not be doing much of that because these guys are professionals and these guys get paid millions of dollars to play this game. They are doing what they love, and they should be playing at a high level. If they're not self-motivated, if they're not ready to play and come play hard for Coach Yeager and the Kings fans, then they should not be playing. Simple as that. And I said, you know what, Kenny, you're 100% correct. So all the blame is not on DeMarcus Cousins. He needs help. He needs to be able to trust his teammates. Last night, he trusted Aaron Aflalo at a very pivotal moment of the game. He trusted him. He gave him the ball. He shot the shot, and he made it. I was talking to Emmanuel, and I said, if you're the Cavs, that is the guy you want shooting the ball because he's been shooting below 35% all year long. And to me, that was a guy that you wanted open, and it just happened that he made the shot. So props to Aaron Aflalo. Props to Cousins for trusting the guy. And hopefully this continues and Aaron begins to play ball because if he doesn't, you have a young man in Malachi Richardson who is hungry and who is waiting for the opportunity to play big-time minutes. So right now it's all rosy. It's all roses, Matt, because they won. But as soon as they lose again, things might go down again. I mean, Kings fans get way too high on wins and we get way too low on losses. So I don't know, Matt. What do you think about that?
No, and I agree with you, and I think you have to put it into perspective that, yes, it was a good win, but this is also a team that was coming off of a terrible stretch at home with games they lost to Indiana and games they lost to Miami, 2 games they should have had, and then that game in Chicago they should have had as well, and we could spend all night talking about how bogus the foul call was against DeMarcus Cousins, and that was one of his few outbursts where I felt he was 100% justified in absolutely everything that he said. In regards to, really quickly, I want to touch on Kenny Thomas because we had him in studio, KHDK today. And if you ever get the opportunity to hang out to or talk with one Kenny Thomas or just go up to him and chat with him, please do. He's a phenomenal man, one of the coolest cats that you will ever meet, a guy that I've had the privilege of sitting next to during the games and during warm-ups at Kings games and chatted. I haven't been to his restaurant yet, and that's bad on me.
What?
It's phenomenal. I know.
Don't tell him that because he will get mad.
He already knows, and he is mad at me. And Kenny Thomas, I mean, he's not the most dominating big in the league, or he wasn't, but he's still pretty big, and he's still pretty scary. So when I told him that, let's just say I was thankful that I was on the other side of the glass from him in the radio studio. But I need to check out his restaurant. But overall, he's a great guy, and I'm sure the conversation you had with him was great. Ours today was phenomenal. So, yes, Kenny Thomas gets a lot of bad rep for just the contract that he had. And then unfortunately he was who came to Sacramento in the trade for Chris Webber. But just an awesome dude. But going back to the Cleveland game, yes, don't get too high on the win because it's something certainly positive, and you have to excuse my bird in the background. He's having his nice little field day back there. You can kind of see his cage there in the background. But the Cavs are a team that are struggling right now, Leo, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with them. They have this almost similar issues that they had around this time last year. If to be honest, LeBron James had to call them out. A lot of the problems were with Kevin Love, not the entire team. Now it's more the entire team issues. So, but the Kings did a good job taking advantage, and they beat a team that came out hungry for a win in their building, and still the Kings were able to come out with the victory. So while you don't want to take a championship banner home with you because of this win, you can certainly pull a lot of positives out of it. I know we have a couple people in the comments line wanting us to touch on the ESPN article really quick, so we will. Again, there's really not much to talk about, to be honest. Leo, I know you haven't read the thing all the way through it because it's extremely long, but it's a great read. It's a phenomenal read. But basically, it's telling a thorough story of all the incidents of DeMarcus Cousins and then all the incidents of the Kings organization. Then it really poses the question, who's holding who back? Is DeMarcus holding the Kings back, or is Kings holding DeMarcus back? And there's not too much opinion in the piece. It's mostly just stories. And if you haven't really gotten an in-depth idea of what's going on, definitely read it. But in the grand scheme of things, you're going to leave it reading it afterwards going, yeah, we kind of already knew this. And there are things in there that we're certainly not proud of. DeMarcus is put on blast at times. The Kings are certainly put on blast. But in the grand scheme of things, it's once again national media perspective, telling a story. And it's a great story. But unfortunately, there really isn't a good guy on both sides. But it really lays everything out there. And I think it's a great read if you ever get the chance to take a look at it.
Yeah, and you mentioned national perspective. Scott Howard Cooper came on your noon show today. And Scott was great, as always. And we'll probably have him on soon on this show. But he pretty much dumped cold water on Kings Nation. The hosts, Ken Rudolph and the other guy,
Damian Barling.
Yeah.
And Jason Ross.
Yeah, Jason wasn't there today, but
Jason was Grant today. Sorry.
Yeah. So they posed a question. Well, I guess they asked Scott what he thought about the Kings, and then he pretty much posed the question, and he said it like this. He said, are you comfortable with Darren Collison within your next 2-3 years? And Damian tried to say, well, no. He said, no. Answer the question. At first he said yes, but then he was like, well, you're right. Darren at best on a good team is a backup player. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, you know what, Darren's going to take us to the promised land or even be a competitor in the playoffs. And he asked us, what about your 2 guard? And everyone was like, well, yeah. What about your 3 guard or your small forward? Yeah. Power forward? Yeah. The only player you can honestly say is DeMarcus Cousins. And, he said if they make the playoffs, it's fool's gold. It might set them back, especially in a deep draft like this. And then you have the issue of, are you going to re-sign Darren and Ty Lawson next year? Honestly, right now, as he stated, the Kings are a mess. And when you think about the Sixers and the T-Wolves, these teams have bright futures, right? Because you see potential there. What do you see with the Kings? It's pretty much what he said. And both hosts were just in shock and disbelief, and they were like, you know what, Scott, you're right. And it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like, what are the Kings doing? But I think it's not what are we doing, it's what are we going to do, Matt? Again, it's easy to point out all the bad things, and it's hard to find or to seek solutions, right?
Right.
So I guess the best thing is, and we'll know by the All-Star break, will they compete for that final 8 spot, or will they pretty much let go of the gas, start playing their young guys, which Papagiannis was balling last night, scoring 23 points and 12 rebounds, I think, and play Malachi a lot more, start playing Scal some, and you know what? Say, we have to play for our future, guys. Bogdan is coming next year. So this organization has a lot of decisions to make within the next couple weeks, and it'll be very interesting, Matt.
We should let you know that this is going to be an abbreviated podcast. You'll notice we're doing it later in the week. Normally we do it on Monday, but that was game night. And then just with how busy this week has been, we were forced to push it off to Thursday. So we're not going to do a full podcast this week because we're going to be back here in a couple days for another Monday podcast as we get back to normal. But to go back to your point, Leo, a lot of what Scott Howard Cooper is absolutely correct. And it's something that's really frustrating because you don't look at this team and see a roadmap. And that scares a lot of people. However, I think the Kings have constantly been trying to work on that roadmap before working on the product that was right in front of them currently. And they've kind of switched that in some sense this year. So I think it's blown a little bit more out of proportion than people would make it seem. And I think it's natural, normal, justifiable fear. However, there are ways that this team can get out of it. There are things that they can do, and things like we saw with the Golden State Warriors, like we've seen a bunch of times in all sports. Things can change in a hurry. All it takes is just one right move or one right player just to make a decision to want to play beside DeMarcus or play in Sacramento or take a big payday. There are a lot of options that there are a lot of variables, let's just say, that can affect the future of the Kings team and really flip things on a dime pretty quickly. I mean, you look at the variable of Rudy Gay going down, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. But again, going back to the Scott Howard Cooper comments, I want to next podcast or the podcast after, depending upon what's currently going on, I want to have a nice extended conversation on Darren Collison because I'm a big fan of his. Yeah. Now, also, I have a good personal relationship with Darren, and I'd be lying if I said that doesn't come into to play per se. Same thing with my relationship with Costa Kufos. I believe he has the talent to be able to be a decent and successful starting point guard, but he won't blow your mind away. I think, again, he's going to be at his best, like you said, and like Scott says, coming off the bench. I think he's worthy of a contract extension, and I hope the Kings certainly give it to him. But I think that's a conversation that we should have as to why and if the Kings should look to potentially move Darren Collison or bring him back and sign him to a long-term deal or look
Agreed.
It's a good conversation to have. And
you might have to write a nice column, Matt.
Absolutely. And I would certainly, I know Darren would not be afraid to talk about the stuff. him on the drive yesterday. And no, it was today. All the days tend to blur together. He came on the show today, and he had a lot of great things to say. He's one of the most level-headed, and he's got a great basketball IQ for a player of his youth and his play style. And I appreciate a lot of what he brings to the table, and think that he can be a very, very good player on a very, very good team. So we'll have that conversation at a later date. But really, let's dive into what we really want to talk about, and that's life after Rudy Gay. And right away, you didn't want to freak out and cry and maybe hurt Rudy's feelings in a way by saying that the Kings are better without him, especially right after he does something as horrific as tearing his ACL. My goodness, that bird's having a good time back there. However, in the grand scheme of things, Leo, and if you can just give your 2 cents on, do you think Rudy Gay is better, or the team is better without Rudy?
Absolutely not. And I get frustrated every time I listen to fans say, "Oh, we're playing better without Rudy Gay." But when you put things in perspective, Matt, the Kings went on a 3-game winning streak without him. He came back against the Sixers, and they won that game barely, but they won that game with him. So that was 4 games straight. Then he played a couple games again, and I felt like he was never fully recovered. He was never really back from his injury, and all he did was re-aggravate some parts of his body, because this guy is a little bit older. He was coming off huge surgery over the offseason, but we've had small sample sizes of life without Rudy Gay. So when people say we're better without him, it's a complete joke, because you know that when Rudy Gay plays, you will get a guaranteed 15 to 20 points every single night, and sometimes even 30 points, because he is that talented of a basketball player. So when they say we're better, that is not true. And at times, I would say he is one of the best defenders on the team, at least statistically speaking, because he is. So when you don't have him, you would want something in return, right? I always said it's unfair to say that, because we've had small sample sizes, and you would probably have someone else in place of Rudy. But now the Kings are in a situation where they don't have Rudy Gay, and they don't have that person that they would have gotten in a trade, or even a potential first-round pick for him. So they got screwed in that sense. Rudy Gay will not opt out. He will be a King next year. He will probably play in mid-January, early February next year, because these type of injuries take a long time to heal from. It's a process. Rehab is painful, but I expect him back. Do I expect him to be where he was? Probably not. But this team is not better without him until they can prove for more than 40 games that they can do it. So if they keep this roster intact the way it is, and they make the playoffs, I'll admit they're better without him. Until then, please do not say that, because we know that this guy is a bona fide scorer in the NBA. We know we can pencil in 18 to 20 points every single night. And that's what this team needs at night, scoring. And that's what they don't have. They don't have consistent players. You have Darren Collison, who scored 23 points last night. Can you imagine if DC scored 23 every night? This team would be a playoff team. That's what elite point guards do. They score over 20 a night. Is he capable of doing it? Of course he is. But Darren Collison, in my opinion, is a role player. The Kings have a lot of role players. So that's why I thought Rudy was better coming off the bench, where you don't have to put all the pressure on him to score so many points every night, because that's what role players do. Role players will have good nights here and there, like Darren Collison, like Ty Lawson. These guys will not give you 20 every night, because that's not who they are. They're not star players. They are good role players, which every team needs. So, yes, this team is not better without Rudy Gay, Matt.
Addressing the question word for word, are the Kings better than or without Rudy Gay? The answer is no, because talent-wise, he is, with the exception of DeMarcus Cousins, the most talented basketball player on this roster. Now, do they play better without Rudy Gay? There can be an argument there, and that has nothing to do with Rudy Gay, or that's not a personal attack on Rudy. That's just players fitting together. And it seems, based off of the small sample size, and it is a small sample size that we've had, the Kings seem to have more success, and the ball seems to move a lot better, and it's better team effort when Rudy Gay has been either out with injury or just has not played or has not been on the floor. So in that sense, I think you can make an argument that the Sacramento Kings are a better team without Rudy Gay playing, and that's just because of their play styles and how the ball moves without him. Rudy is at his best in isolation. That's always how he's been, and multiple players that are considered top talents in the NBA are best in isolation. So that's not a gripe against Rudy saying, oh, he needs to change his play style because it's dead in the NBA. Well, it's certainly going out of style with the quick passing and the shooting from deep, but it's still a prominent way to play the game of basketball. And you see isolation ball being played all over the world. So that is who Rudy is. And that can be useful to certain teams if they incorporate that into their system. The Kings have tried again and again and again to try and find a way to incorporate it in with ball movement and with DeMarcus Cousins down low, who is very much an isolation player and a ball stopper in his own right. And it just hasn't worked. That's not necessarily Rudy's fault. That's just two types of players with different systems and different styles, similar in some ways, but very different in others, that just don't work as well. And DeMarcus Cousins is obviously the better, more rounded, well-rounded player. So he certainly gets the nod in that sense. But I agree. I don't think the Kings are a better team without Rudy Gay because he is extremely talented. But I do agree, and I do believe that the Kings play better basketball when he isn't on the floor, Leo.
Yes, yeah. I don't agree with that because whenever your second best player on any team or even your third best player goes down with injury, and it doesn't even have to be season-ending injuries. It can be just for a couple of weeks, right? Players play have to. I mean, these guys are professional athletes. We're acting like these guys are college basketball players. No, teams fight because their brother is down. So they unite and they play as a team because they have to. Because they have to fill in that void. They have to fill in those 18 points. Malachi had 9 of those points at the half, and he finished with 12. So he filled in 12 of those 18 points last night. So, yes, in retrospect, they might play better as a team because they have to play better as a team. That's every team in the NBA, Matt. Whenever a guy goes down, someone has to step up. And when your second player is out, other guys have to replace that scoring, that defense, those rebounds. So yes, it's logically sound when you say they play better, but in reality, they are not better. I don't know if that makes any sense. So when Caleb went down, everyone else, Tristan Thompson, J.R. Smith, they had to fill in for Caleb's stats. You know, like, does that make sense?
Not necessarily. I don't understand I get what you're saying, and I think I get half of what you're saying, Leo. I understand what you mean in terms of Rudy. You do have to pick up when you lose guys with the production of Rudy Gay. Someone who averages 20-plus points per night, of course you have to get that scoring and get that production from somewhere else. That's just the next man up mentality. And yes, that's common with every team. However, I don't agree necessarily saying that the reason why the Kings are better is because they have to, or they succeeded without Rudy Gay on the floor is because they've had to, and that's the definitive reason of saying they're not better, if that makes sense. You know, yes, they have to pick up the slack when they lose Rudy. But what we've seen so far this season, and even goes back to last season as well, they play a better brand of basketball. They're more competitive, and quite frankly, they're winning games more when Rudy isn't playing. So
are they though?
But they are though. They have won more games than they have lost without Rudy on the floor.
I don't think they're winning more games without him. Like, I highly doubt it.
You can't say that they're not playing better basketball without him on the floor. That's the argument. They are playing better basketball without him on the floor. They just don't have another guy, with the exception of DeMarcus Cousins, to completely pick up that scoring or completely pick up those numbers that he provides. But as a team, they play better. Half of it is because, yes, they have to, and the other half is because, quite frankly, Rudy Gay not being on the floor opens up the game for everybody else. And I don't think there's an argument really against that, Leo, just because of Rudy's playing style. That, again, that's not a swipe against Rudy. That's just how this team works and plays better together when Rudy is on the floor. And I think Cleveland is a good example of that. And then with the exception of the loss to Indiana, because they fell apart really after the Rudy injury, excuse me. And that was because really they saw one of their friends and brothers go down with a horrific, potentially career-ending injury. With the exception of that, for the most part, the team has rallied and I think played better team basketball when he hasn't been on the floor. So that's where the argument, I believe, is in regards to they're better off without him.
See, I don't see it that way because when K-Love went down for the Cavs, Tristan and J.R. Smith stepped up. And now you have LeBron James saying that LeBron, Kyrie, and K-Love do most of the work. And I'm like, yeah, duh. You guys are you guys are the big three. So, and you have role players around you. So to me, it just goes back to players. Some players are role players, Matt, and some players are star players who take on more pressure. And most of these guys on the Kings are players that are role players. So when you have a guy like Rudy, in my opinion, is a third option on a good team, he's still a third option on a good team. So he's that type of player that can score 20 points a night. And unfortunately, we don't have that third guy on the Kings. DC might score 21 night, but then he won't do it again till 2 weeks from now. So I'm interested to see how he will play tomorrow after a very good game. Like, we haven't seen Darren score 20 points 3 games in a row. Like, I can't I can recall the last time he did that. And the same goes for all these players. I'm not picking on Darren. I'm just saying the Kings don't have that much talent to say that they're better without him or they play better without him. If he asked Coach Jaeger the same thing, he would deny it and he would say, no, this team is better in the pick and roll with Rudy Gay because Rudy can do things that other guys can't do. So I guess I'm seeing it from a basketball standpoint where I don't see how they're better without him because if they didn't have Rudy Gay, they would have someone else. And it just happens that now they won't have that one else because they don't have Rudy for the entire year. So the Kings just got screwed, Matt.
I totally understand, and I want to go back to one thing you said, which is absolutely correct. The Kings are better in the pick and roll offense when Rudy Gay's on the floor. You're absolutely right about that. But the Kings don't really incorporate pick and roll into their offense very much and do so successfully, Leo. Most of their offense involves ground and pound, getting the ball inside of DeMarcus Cousins, or isolation play on the perimeter. We've seen that more than any kind of pick and rolls, and simply because, one, the Kings' best center, their best scorer on the roll, DeMarcus Cousins, he doesn't set very good screens. And he can, but he doesn't. And I encourage people to watch DeMarcus Cousins off the ball on offense. A lot of the times he does great stuff, especially when it comes to communication. But his screens have never been good. So a pick and roll offense, potentially a pick and roll offense between Rudy Gay and DeMarcus Cousins could be phenomenal, but it just isn't, and it hasn't been. So that's where the argument comes into play. And what I'm talking about is Rudy presents a lot of really good things that can help, and that's a reason why he is a borderline. Well, he used to be a borderline all-star, and he's a very, very good scorer and good role player, is because, yes, he does have great skill sets for a pick-and-roll offense, but it just hasn't worked with this system. It hasn't worked with Cousins, and it hasn't worked with the Kings because they don't really incorporate pick-and-roll into their offense as much, which I think they should have more, but that's another argument, another conversation for another time. But Rudy presents a lot of benefits and a lot of really good opportunities in areas that the Kings just don't seem to want to incorporate or don't seem to want to do as much. Why? Because they already have so much of DeMarcus Cousins to lean on. That's where I think there's the rift, is Rudy Gay is a great player, but not a good fit. And that's, I think, where the real argument is, not necessarily is the team better without him or not.
Yeah, and I think he's not as good of a fit because this team doesn't have a star point guard who can put their players in the right positions. No offense to Darren or Ty, but they're not that guy. Like, if they had a Damian Lillard or Chris Paul type player, even a Steph Curry, Rudy Gay would be that much better. Just like everyone else on the Warriors, everyone else on the Blazers, like a CJ McCollum type player. Right. One can argue that CJ, in some sense, is an ISO player because he stops the ball, and he looks a lot for his offense. So when you have a guy like that who can score from the guard position, it makes your life that much easier. And that's something that the Kings just don't have. And so it bugs me when people say they're better without Rudy, because there are teams, good teams, who would love to have Rudy Gay because they know that they have a system in place and they have a leader, a coach on the floor at all times. So to me, you're not better without Rudy. You won't be better without Rudy because you have to add to your talent, and the Kings are not very talented. So again, if they had a star point guard, Rudy would be that much better, if that makes any sense to you, Matt.
Yeah, and we'll carry on this conversation into next time because it's partly to do with the Darren Collin conversation that we're going to have. But I don't think that the point guard position is one of the major problems with the Kings. I don't think it's their first problem they have to address. It's a problem that I'm sure they would like to address in the future. But as of right now, I think Collison is one of the least of their worries. I think it's the shooting guard spot first and foremost, and then it's probably going to become the small forward spot here in a little bit, and then finding a consistent player piece, a big man to play alongside DeMarcus Cousins down low. But
short term, yeah, you're right. Short term, Darren is the least of their issues. But if you're looking at long playoff runs, you need that star point guard, Matt.
But you got to get to the dance before you can start thinking about long playoff runs.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. And I don't think the Kings are too focused on trying to make it to the Western Conference Finals right now. I think they just want to get in and get a taste of it and then take the next necessarily step. It's one at a time, not necessarily they're not skipping two to get to that pinnacle right away. But I agree with you. That is the long-term conversation. That's a conversation we certainly can have. But as we wrap up here, again, short podcast, because we're going to have another one here in 3-4 days on Monday to get back to our regular schedule. But before we wrap up, I just got one question, Leo, for us to wrap up with. How about Malachi Richardson? I mean, it's a guy that we finally are getting to see what the kid can do. He's come in, and more impressive than the numbers that he's putting up, it's just the confidence that he's playing with. And it looks like not just the IQ is there, but it looks like he is ready to prove that he belongs, and he's out there with an effort and an intensity that, quite honestly, we haven't seen out of a shooting guard position since maybe Marcus Thornton.
Yeah, and I'm really happy for Malachi. You know, we've talked a lot. I covered him a lot in Reno. You know, I talked to his manager, and they're ecstatic for the opportunity. I'm just hoping that he gets consistent minutes now. You know, and I'm talking about 20 to 25 minutes a night, because if Aaron Aflalo is getting 40 minutes a night, to me that's an issue. You know, he put up 12 points in 14 minutes. That's ludicrous talk. Like, that is efficiency at its finest. So I just can't wait to see what the future holds for this young man. I know he's excited. And again, Garrett Temple said it best. Now it's not his confidence on offense, because we all know he can score. Now it's going to be up to his defense. And if he buys into their system, and if he studies enough film where he won't get lost and he won't get beat on these backdoor cuts and stuff like that, if he can stay honest on defense, then coach will play him a lot more, and coach will trust him a lot more. But again, to me at least, it goes back to Aaron Aflalo, Matt Barnes playing a lot more minutes than Malachi. To me, makes no sense, because these guys are not very good shooters, and something that this team needs right now is shooting. And again, it's a process. I get it. He wants to ease him in there and not put all this pressure right away. But if you talk to Malachi, he wants that pressure. Like, he lives for those moments. So he wants that chance, and I think he'll get it, because he's only going to get better. He will continue to play hard basketball, and he will continue to play with that moxiness and that confidence that he has, and that he's carried his entire career. So let's hope for the best for this young man. And I do want to give a shout out to Juan Flores, a big Cowbell Kingdom supporter, who donated his tickets to the Pacers game for free to another Kings fan. So shout out to him. Lots of love from the entire CK staff, man.
If you're a basketball fan or simply love the Sacramento Kings, hoopcats.com is the place to go when it comes to NBA autographs, memorabilia, and trading cards. That's right. If you want to sign DeMarcus Cousins or Willie Cauley-Stein rookie card, hoopcats.com has got them right now. So be sure to like their Instagram page and ask for the CK special. You can check out all the great deals that they have going on. We want to know what your thoughts are on Malachi Richardson. Are you pleased with how he's playing so far. Do you think he can be a future starting shooting guard for this team? Or are you trying to take it slow and say, I need really more of a sample size to see really what he can do on a night in, night out basis? What about Rudy Gay? Do you think the Kings are a better team, or do you think they play better without him on the floor? And then have you read the ESPN article about DeMarcus Cousins and the Kings? Your thoughts on that? And also just your reaction to the Kings and Cavaliers win. It's okay to be excited, but don't blow it too far out of proportion, because it's just one win and there's still a lot to go. And the Kings have certainly some work to do tomorrow night, taking on the Indiana Pacers, a game that they should have had in Sacramento, and a game I believe they should have, especially after a win in Cleveland. Plus, the Pacers are coming off of a back-to-back. I think their next 3 opponents are coming off of back-to-backs, and these 3 games are certainly winnable. And I would like to see if the Kings can start to put something together, maybe end, if you can imagine ending this.
Give me your prediction, Matt, right now. Last 4 games.
Last 4 games. Well, I'd have to look at, honestly, all 4 that they're playing, because I don't remember all 4. I think they will win in Indiana. I think I want to believe they'll win in Philly, but the way Philly's playing right now, I don't know. I think that game's going to be super competitive. Who is after Philly? Please remind me, because I'm blanking on who comes after Philly.
Yeah, let me have it. I'll give it to you right now.
While you're looking that up, just to address the
Houston.
Philly thing. Houston, that's a loss. I'm sorry, they're not going to outscore Houston in Houston. Just the way they were embarrassed in Sacramento, I don't think they can. Just with the struggles that they have on the defensive end, I really just don't think they have much of a chance in Houston. I think that's a loss. However, I think they will be Indiana. I think they should win in Philly, and then
they have the Pacers, the Hornets, the Sixers, and the Rockets.
Hornets too. They should beat the Hornets as well. Charlotte is a
so
decent
you have them going 3-1.
I have them going 2-2. I think they will drop one of these. To be honest, the Pacers, the 76ers, and the Hornets are 3 teams that the Kings reasonably can beat. However, I don't think they'll win all 3. I think they'll drop one that they should have.
Which one will they lose? Tell me.
Probably the one in Philly. I just have this feeling with Philadelphia.
Okay, so you got win Pacers, win Hornets. So you got a 4-game win streak. Then lose to Sixers and lose to the Rockets.
Sounds right to me. I mean, honestly, the way they've played, it could very easily be 1-3 or maybe even 0-4. We hope not. Just knowing this team with how up and down they are, I think we'll get a good idea of the team with how they respond after a big win in Cleveland, I think, tomorrow night. So we'll definitely see there. But also, give your predictions right then and there for these next 4 games. We would love to hear those as well. But for right now, we're going to wrap it up. For my partner, Leo Biaz, my name is Matt George. Thank you guys so much for joining us once again. This has been the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. We'll see you next week, back on Monday on cowbellkingdom.com.